Clink! Crash! A champagne flute shattered against polished marble, its golden contents splashing across Olivia Carter's pristine leather loafer. "This isn't your place." Ms. Blake's voice cracked like a whip, echoing through the VIP lounge at Heathrow. Olivia froze, heart pounding. Around her, the clink of luxury, silver trays, crystal glasses, hushed conversations came to a sudden halt. Olivia's mind raced. She lifted her gaze from the spilled bubbles to the woman in crisp navy uniform, silk scarf perfectly knotted, stilettos clicking with authority. Ms. Blake's lips curved into a polite smile, but her eyes were ice. Sorry," Olivia stammered, fumbling for her boarding pass. "I have a valid ticket. Seat 2A. Ms. Blake didn't blink. Instead, she leaned in, tone deliberate. "Business and first-class lounge is for premier customers only. You clearly don't belong here." A hush swept through the lounge. Executives in tailored suits, retirees in cashmere wraps, all turned to watch. Olivia's cheeks burned hotter than the spilled champagne at her feet. She swallowed, forcing her voice steady. "My pass is real. If you'd like, I can show you the confirmation email on my phone." Ms. Blake tapped a perfectly manicured nail against her glass. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I know who pays and who doesn't." She straightened, then walked away, leaving Olivia alone with dripping embarrassment. Norman Carter, Olivia's father, CEO of Carter Energy, had insisted on this seat. He'd congratulated her on finishing top of her science program and landing a coveted internship at the United Nations. The $5,200 0-cent business class ticket was both a reward and a sign of confidence. Olivia had earned every bit of it. Now she stood in the glare of judgment, ticket crumpled in her hand. The plush lounge doors loomed behind her. The main terminal beyond promised anonymity, but at the cost of that coveted 2A. Olivia took a steadying breath. She would not cry, she would not beg. She squared her shoulders and slipped the pass back into her blazer. "Fine," she whispered, voice low but firm. "I'll go." A ripple of whispering followed her out. She crossed the threshold into the main concourse. Harsh fluorescent lights, rolling suitcases, distant flight announcements. The luxury of the VIP area gave way to sterile airport hustle. Her polished shoes clicked on tile. Each step felt heavier than the last. Unseated in the cramped economy cabin, Olivia pressed her back against the cold wall and closed her eyes. She replayed every moment. The confident approach to the counter, the polite smile that had met contempt, the way Ms. Blake's stare had cut through her like a blade. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a notification from the FAA app she'd installed as a special intern in training. Emergency code 47B. Ready. Olivia's throat tightened. She didn't want to embarrass Ms. Blake more than she already had, but she owed herself a chance at justice, and a world that believed a young woman could belong anywhere she'd earned. Swiping open her boarding pass, Olivia located the discreet QR code under the official seal. With a steady thumb, she scanned it through the FAA app's emergency hotline. Her pulse quickened as the screen confirmed. Directive 47B engaged. Alert sent. Behind the curtain, the galley lights flickered and then stabilized. Olivia didn't need to see more. The system would take care of the rest. Back in the lounge, Miss Blake reached for her phone. A single beep, sharp, insistent, blew the smug confidence from her face. She stared at the screen as if it had betrayed her. Her perfectly coiffed hair trembled when she realized the alert came not from a patron's complaint, but from an FA directive. In the cockpit, Captain Monroe's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received an emergency FAA grounding order. We must remain at the gate until further notice. Apologies for the delay." A murmur rippled through the passengers. Olivia felt a rush of vindication, but kept her seat, heart fluttering. She wasn't looking for applause, just the quiet satisfaction of truth prevailing. Blake's heels clicked urgently as she hurried away, summoned to the cockpit to explain herself. Olivia pressed her fingertips to her lips, inhaled slowly, and let the tension drain. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't caused a scene. She'd simply held her ground. And, with one discreet scan, reminded everyone that respect comes not from money alone, but from the right to belong. And that belonged to her. Olivia Carter eased into the plush contours of seat 2A, the leather cool beneath her fingertips as she buckled her seatbelt and tucked her satchel into the spacious overhead bin. The soft hum of the aircraft's pre-fleet systems vibrated through the cabin walls, a steady reminder that soon she'd be soaring across the Atlantic. Around her, fellow business-class passengers adjusted pillows, leafed through in-fleet magazines, and sipped champagne. But Olivia barely noticed. Her attention was fixed on the leather-bound portfolio resting in her lap. Inside were the summary papers from her recent internship at the United Nations, the very reason she'd earned this ticket in the first place. Just a week ago, she'd walked through the UN Secretariat building in New York, awed by the towering flagpoles lining the plaza and the marble floors polished from decades of world leaders' footsteps. She'd spent long days in cramped briefing rooms, poring over data on climate resilience and drafting policy recommendations on sustainable energy, when her supervisor, a senior economic advisor, had tapped her on the shoulder and said, "We want you back next quarter." Olivia had felt a surge of pride unlike anything before. It was that accomplishment, her acceptance into a highly competitive science program followed by this unforgettable UN experience, that had compelled her father to give her this business-class ticket, a tangible token of faith in her abilities. Now, as the flight attendant passed by distributing noise-canceling headphones and menus featuring lobster risotto and truffle parmesan potatoes, Olivia allowed herself a quiet smile. She flipped open her portfolio and reread the cover letter praising her meticulous research and insightful policy analysis. Inside, neatly clipped graphs depicted projected carbon reductions. Beneath them, concise bullet points outlined funding strategies to accelerate renewable infrastructure. Her fingers traced the bullet points almost reverently. She reminded herself that this wasn't just paperwork. It was her contribution to a better future. A soft chime signaled that the cabin doors were closing. Olivia straightened in her seat, smoothing her skirt and lifting her chin. Her heart pounded not with anxiety, but with anticipation. This flight represented more than a trip home. It symbolized new beginnings. Back in London, she would debrief her UN team via video call, then dive into preparations for her next project, a proposal to integrate solar microgrids in rural communities. All of it drove her forward, fueled by the belief that even at 17, one person's determination could spark meaningful change. Her gaze drifted to the window, where pale London daylight was already fading into dusk. The sleek silver wing of the jet reflected the tangerine glow of sunset clouds. A familiar thrill ran through her chest, the thrill of possibility, of boundless horizons stretching out beneath the wings. She remembered her first solo flight at age 14, when her nerves had morphed into exhilaration the moment the plane lurched down the runway. That day, she'd promised herself she'd never let fear hold her back. Tonight, she was reminded of how far she'd come. Just as she settled into her thoughts, the flight attendant, who'd checked her boarding pass earlier, Blake, swung by with a tray of sparkling water. Olivia braced for another glare or a dismissive glance, but the attendant nodded curtly and moved on. Olivia exhaled. Perhaps the earlier incident in the VIP lounge, though humiliating, had been a closed chapter. In this cabin, she intended to savor every moment. The fine dining, the uninterrupted quiet for reading, and the space to reflect on her achievements. She reached for the noise-canceling headphones and turned on the soft instrumental playlist she had queued up. As the engines roared to life and the seatbelt sign blinked on, Olivia's thoughts flickered back to the UN corridors, shaking hands with diplomats, debating grant proposals, and the hum of international cooperation. She felt a deep connection to every idea she'd pitched and every statistic she'd cited to bolster her arguments. Those experiences had reshaped her worldview, forging in her a sense of responsibility that extended far beyond her own ambitions. Now, suspended between continents, she felt a surge of purpose. To translate those policy ideas into real-world action, starting with the next phase of her career. The plane taxied, the city lights of London dimming behind them, and Olivia pressed her palm against the window's cool surface. She trusted in her training, her intellect, and the network she'd built, even in the face of skepticism earlier that afternoon. The rhythmic rumble of wheels on the tarmac faded into a gentle lift as the aircraft climbed skyward. Olivia oriented her portfolio on the fold-out tray, already reviewing the timeline for her next UN briefing. As the cabin lights dimmed and the in-flight service menus were collected, Olivia leaned back and closed her eyes. A single thought settled in her mind. This journey wasn't just about returning home. It was about charting a course for her future, one policy proposal at a time. She inhaled the faint scent of new leather and recycled air, feeling grounded by the knowledge that she had earned her place here, both literally in Seat 2A and figuratively in the next generation of leaders. And as the engines droned on, Olivia drifted into a calm focus, ready for whatever challenges and triumphs awaited her on the horizon. The cabin lights glowed softly overhead as the seatbelt sign blinked off. A hush settled over the business class section of Flight 742, and passengers exchanged polite smiles. Except for one. Miss Blake stood at the front of the cabin, arms crossed, gaze fixed on Olivia Carter, with an intensity that made every hair on Olivia's arms prickle. Olivia straightened in her seat, sliding the portfolio onto the armrest. She felt tension knot in her chest. Just moments ago she'd allowed herself a quiet moment of pride, the engine's hum beneath her, the soft cushion of Seat 2A, and the promise of a smooth journey. But now that peace evaporated under Ms. Blake's icy stare. Ms. Blake cleared her throat, voice measured but low enough that only the first few rows could hear. "Miss Carter," she said, her tone flat. "I need to see your boarding pass again." Olivia took a breath and reached into her blazer pocket. She withdrew the slightly crumpled pass, its edges a reminder of the spill in the lounge. "Here you go," she replied, offering it calmly. Mrs. Blake studied the pass for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Other passengers in the first 4 rows glanced at each other, sensing the tension. Olivia's pulse thundered in her ears, and she reminded herself to breathe slowly, to keep her voice even. Finally, Ms. Blake's eyes narrowed. "Seat 2A," she read aloud, then looked up. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake." Olivia's throat went dry. "What do you mean?" Her fingers curled around the armrest. Without warning, Ms. Blake leaned forward, lowering her voice to a whisper that carried, "Your ticket is for business class, yes. But tonight's flight has a special configuration. We're oversold by 2 seats, and those seats go to our frequent flyer platinum members." She paused for dramatic effect. "I don't make the rules. You just have to comply." Heat rushed to Olivia's cheeks. She swallowed hard. "I'm a platinum member," she said quietly. "My boarding pass even shows the status indicator." She tilted the pass to catch the overhead light. The little gold star sat next to her name. Ms. Blake's nostrils flared. "That star doesn't mean you outrank our corporate clients," she said sharply. She pointed toward the economy cabin through the curtain. "Please, gather your belongings and move to your reassigned seat." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Olivia looked around. Executives paused mid-sip, older couples exchanged uncomfortable glances, and a mother gently hushed her child. The silence pressed against her, heavier than any voice could. She could almost hear her own heart beating, thump, thump. Fighting the urge to bolt upright, Olivia slid out of C2A with as much composure as she could muster. She lifted her portfolio and noise-canceling headphones, then closed her eyes for a moment as she stepped into the aisle. The cabin door swung open, and the staccato of her heels echoed through the business-class sanctuary. Every step felt like a page in a play she hadn't auditioned for. She heard Ms. Blake's heels clicking behind her, slow, deliberate. A merciless spotlight followed her down the aisle. Passengers shifted in their seats to watch. The woman in row 1D tucked her chin into a fur collar. A man in row 3B cleared his throat. A grandmother in row 5E adjusted her pearl necklace, as if preparing for a photo. Olivia's senses sharpened. The subtle scent of almond-scented cleanser mixed with recycled air, the distant whir of the galley cart, the soft overhead announcements fading in and out. She gripped her portfolio tighter, reminding herself that inside were ideas larger than any single flight. Climate policy, renewable energy frameworks, the future she was building. She drew strength from those visions, her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to let shame define her story. At the economy curtain, Ms. Blake stepped forward and tapped Olivia's shoulder. Her voice was cold enough to etch glass. "Seat 18C." She indicated a spot 3 rows back. "Enjoy it." Then she turned sharply and strode away, leaving Olivia alone in the narrower, darker section of the plane. Olivia exhaled, fighting the swirl of humiliation and anger. She walked down the aisle, catching the uncertain stare of a passenger who'd booked last-minute coach to see his grandchildren. Olivia's stomach twisted. She didn't want pity. She wanted justice. But she also knew that losing her temper would play right into Ms. Blake's hands. When Olivia reached seat 18C, she paused. The cushion looked thriftier, the legroom tighter, the overhead bin slots nearly full. She set down her portfolio and slid into the seat, pressing her back against the stiff fabric. The murmur of passengers and the low chime of the seatbelt sign felt oppressive. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the weight of it all settle. The injustice, the spotlight, the stunned silence that followed her. But then Olivia thought of her UN briefing, of the mentors who told her she had a bright future, and of her father's unwavering belief in her. That belief didn't come with conditions on where she sat. It came from her character and her work. She straightened in her seat, lifting her chin. She tapped her phone's screen and opened the FAA app, the next step in her plan. She reminded herself, sometimes the most powerful voice isn't the loudest one, but the one that speaks at exactly the right moment. As Ms. Blake's distant laughter filtered through the galley curtain, Olivia took a steadying breath and tapped the QR code hidden beneath her boarding pass. The app responded with a quiet ping. Directive 47B engaged. Behind her, the cabin lights flickered briefly. Olivia didn't need to look back. She knew that soon, the entire flight, every seat from first class to the back, would understand that respect wasn't a matter of configuration charts or status stars. It was a right. And she was about to make sure they couldn't ignore it. The overhead fastened seatbelt sign glowed softly, casting muted reflections on the polished metal of the armrest. Olivia Carter sat in seat 18C, her back pressed against the stiff economy fabric, the noise-canceling headphones resting unused on her lap. Around her, passengers settled into the cramped rows, some flipping through magazines, others closing their eyes, and the low drone of the engines felt distant, almost serene, but inside Olivia's chest, a storm was raging. Her initial humiliation had cooled into a slow-burning ache. She traced the indentation of her backpack strap against her shoulder and remembered how, just a few moments ago, the cabin had felt like a sanctuary. Now it seemed like a courtroom. She pictured Ms. Blake's expression, cold, dismissive, when she'd been ordered to give up her seat. The shadow of that moment had followed her all the way down the aisle, settling in her stomach like a lead weight. Closing her eyes, Olivia let her thoughts drift back to the VIP lounge at Heathrow. She replayed the cascade of champagne, the hush that fell over polished travelers, and the polite but merciless way Ms. Blake had dismissed her claim. Every detail felt magnified now. The click of heels, the low murmur of onlookers, the spotlight glare of judgment. She could still feel her pulse thudding against her throat as she stepped into this narrower world, where legroom was a luxury and personal space vanished. A soft sigh escaped her lips. Shame and anger swirled inside her, but so did something else, a simmering determination. She reminded herself of the United Nations briefing rooms, where data and facts trumped prejudice. She recalled how her mentor had praised her for presenting clear evidence, not drama. How her calm, collected approach had swayed diplomats twice her age. If she had the power to shift global policy on renewable energy, she could find a way to shift this momentary injustice into something meaningful. Olivia opened her eyes and glanced down at her hands resting on her portfolio. The pages of her policy summaries lay folded, waiting. She could have let the injustice define her, could have retreated into tears or a standoff. But that wasn't who she was. She inhaled slowly, feeling the cool, recycled air fill her lungs, and let her racing mind settle. The humiliation was real, but it was not her identity. Around her, the economy cabin hummed with muted tension. A family of 4 across the aisle passed a tablet back and forth. A business traveler in the row ahead rustled paperwork. The flight attendants moved quietly, unaware of the silent drama that had unfolded up front. Olivia reminded herself that everyone here had a story. Some weary commuter, some vacationing couple, some traveler, desperately trying to get home. Many would never understand her experience, and many more would turn away rather than intervene. But she didn't need them to intervene. She needed one person to answer her call. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You have the power to stand up for what's right, Liv. Use it wisely." Olivia flipped open the FAA app on her phone, scrolling past general information to the section marked Emergency Directive 47B. She'd initiated the code with a quiet tap, but now she needed to trust that the protocol would work exactly as designed. Beneath the polite veneer of this flight lay a structure of rules and regulations, tools built to safeguard fairness, not privilege. Her gaze drifted to the curtains separating first class from economy. She pictured Ms. Blake pacing behind it, mangled confidence now replaced by frantic anxiety. Beneath the surface poise, the lead attendant would be forced to reckon with the same truth Olivia felt in her bones. Respect isn't allocated by seat number. It's earned by action. Olivia set her phone aside and let her fingers trace the embossed airline logo on the armrest. Each press grounded her. This was real. She pictured the captain's announcement reverberating through the cabin. "We've received an emergency grounding order. Please remain in your seats." The words had been calm but unyielding, a reminder that authority could be wielded quietly, without spectacle. A gentle chime indicated the flight attendants were preparing dinner service. The galley door opened, and the scent of roasted chicken and steamed vegetables drifted down the aisle. Normally, Olivia would have closed her eyes and looked forward to the meal. Tonight, food felt like a distant luxury. Instead, she leaned back and let herself absorb the moment. The tactile coolness of the safety card against her palm, the steady engine hum, the faint rumble of the wheels against concrete as the plane settled at the gate. Time seemed suspended. Passengers exchanged uncertain glances, wondering why takeoff had stalled. Many tapped their watches or windows. Some whispered to companions. Still, they did not look at her. She was a ghost in the cabin, unseen yet unmistakably present. That silence carried weight. It signaled collective recognition of wrongdoing, even if unspoken. Olivia closed her eyes again, and this time, she welcomed the quiet. She let the mix of pain and empowerment flow through her veins like electricity. The injustice was the spark. Her response would be the flame. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need tears. She needed resolve. When the call finally came, no roar of engines, no dramatic announcement, Olivia would know she had played her part. She'd allowed the system she respected to do its work. She'd held her dignity rather than letting anger consume her. And in that stillness, she found her strength. With a soft exhale, Olivia placed her hand over her heart. She was sitting in seat 18C, but her soul was unbowed. She whispered to herself, "I belong here. I'll be heard." And in that quiet vow, a new chapter of her story began. One defined not by how she was treated, but by how she chose to respond. Olivia shifted in her economy seat, the fabric's tight weave pressing against her back as she slipped her phone from the inside pocket of her blazer. The cabin murmured softly around her, passengers leafing through magazines, the gentle clank of service carts, the low hum of the ventilation system. It all sounded distant, muted by the weight of what she was about to do. She stared at the screen of her phone. On it, the FAA app glowed with quiet authority. A discrete icon labeled Emergency Directive 47B sat at the bottom of the home screen. She remembered her father's voice when he explained how she, as a special FAA intern, had access to this protocol for worst-case scenarios. "Liv," he'd said, "if you ever face discrimination or a safety threat, you initiate the code. The moment you do, you're tapping into federal power, no questions asked." Her thumb hovered over the icon. Olivia's pulse sped up. In one pocket lay her portfolio filled with United Nations reports. In another, her boarding pass embedded with the hidden QR code. Everywhere else, she looked like any other quiet teenager, bounced back to coach class. But tonight, she held more leverage than anyone in this cabin could imagine. She took a deep breath and opened the directive. A form appeared. "Confirm Emergency Directive 47B activation," it read, detailing that this protocol would ground the aircraft immediately for a formal investigation. She glanced around the aisle. Nobody was watching her. The passenger in 18B was dozing, the couple in 18A whispering about holiday plans, the mother in 19C gently humming to her toddler. They all assumed she was just another economy traveler. Olivia swiped to confirm. A second screen asked her to scan her boarding pass QR code. She pulled the pass out, the slight crease from Heathrow's champagne spill still visible, and held it under her phone's camera. The app beeped. "QR code verified," flashed in green. She pressed the final submit button. Her stomach fluttered. She tapped the screen again when the confirmation appeared. Directive 47B engaged, notifying flight crew and FAA operations. Then she set the phone aside, folding her hands in her lap. Immediately, the cabin lights flickered as the galley doors swung open and the staff's brisk conversation stilled. Olivia felt a ripple of anticipation. This was it. The system she trusted was moving into action. Up front, Captain Monroe's voice crackled over the intercom, calm but unmistakable. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have received an emergency ground directive from the FAA under Directive 47B. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We will return to the gate momentarily. A collective murmur rose among the passengers. The toddler in 19C stirred and looked around, confused. The couple in 18A exchanged startled glances. Olivia, her heart pounding in her ears, remained perfectly still. An island of composure amid the swirl of confusion. In the galley, Ms. Blake froze mid-step, her tray of wine glasses trembling in her hand. She exchanged a look with her junior attendant, Luis, lips parting as if to speak, then clamped her mouth shut. A bead of sweat formed at her temple. Olivia's stomach tightened at the sight of Ms. Blake's panic. Finally, the attendant set the glasses down with exaggerated care and hurried up the aisle. Olivia watched as Ms. Blake's heels clicked urgently on the cabin floor. The flight attendant's usual crisp posture was gone, replaced by an anxious hurriedness. She disappeared behind the curtain that separated first and business class. Behind her, Luis hovered, eyes darting to the cockpit door. Olivia exhaled slowly. This side of the curtain, the economy cabin still buzzed quietly. People whispered to their neighbors, their voices a low hum. A woman in 20D tapped her watch. A man in 17F stood and peered forward through the overhead bins, frowning. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but they sensed that the woman in the premium seats, the one who'd wielded authority moments earlier, had lost it. Olivia leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. Relief washed over her, but she refused to let it cloud her purpose. She reminded herself that this was only the beginning of accountability. Next, Ms. Blake would have to face the captain and FAA investigators, explain her actions under oath. Olivia felt a quiet thrill at the thought. Captain Monroe's voice returned, softer this time. "We're taxiing back to gate 27. We apologize for the inconvenience and will update you as soon as we receive further instructions." Along the aisle, flight attendants moved to secure loose items. Luis passed by Olivia, offering a small nod of acknowledgement, but nothing more. Olivia nodded back, grateful for the silent recognition. She felt a bond of shared triumph with Luis, even though they'd never spoken more than a few words. At seat 18B, the dozing passenger stirred and leaned over. "Hey, did you see that?" he asked, voice hushed. "I thought we were cleared for takeoff." Olivia simply offered a small, neutral smile. She closed her book. She'd been reading a UN report on carbon sequestration and placed it in her lap. She didn't need to explain. The hairs on her arms tingled with the knowledge that justice had been delivered without her raising her voice. She let her gaze drift to the cabin ceiling, where the soft lighting created long, calm lanes of illumination. It was oddly peaceful for such a charged moment. That peace, she realized, was the product of order asserting itself. When rules were designed to protect fairness, they worked, even when the initial system had been abused. Moments later, the seatbelt sign clicked off. Passengers shifted in their seats, murmuring about delayed flights and lost connections. Olivia spotted Ms. Blake's silhouette through the curtain, erect and trembling, heading toward the cockpit door. The attendant's confident stride was gone. In its place was purposeful uncertainty. Olivia's lips curved in a small, satisfied smile. She turned to look out the window, catching sight of Heathrow's gate lights and the jet bridge sliding into place. She saw the ground crew waiting, their high-visibility vests bright under the floodlights. This moment, this return to the gate, felt like a victory lap, a public acknowledgement that a wrong had been righted. Olivia tucked her hands under her chin and allowed herself to relax. She didn't need fanfare. The murmurs around her, the captain's formal apology, Ms. Blake's anxious pacing, that was enough. In this quiet victory, she found a profound sense of closure. Then, from her pocket, her phone buzzed again. A message from her father. "Well done, Liv. Proud of you." She tapped the reply field and simply typed, "Thank you." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and leaned into the fabric of her seat, ready for whatever came next. She had reclaimed more than a seat, she'd reclaimed her dignity. And in doing so, reminded everyone on board that true power lies in quiet resolve. Ms. Blake stood behind the galley counter with an air of forced composure, her back ramrod straight and her shoulders squared as though daring anyone to question her authority. She adjusted the silver napkin stack for the third time in 2 minutes, each precise motion betraying the tension coiling under her uniform. The soft hum of the flight attendant's chatter was a distant backdrop. She had mastered the art of commanding silence in first class, but tonight, something felt off. Olivia Carter sat several rows back in 18C, fingers lightly drumming the armrest, eyes fixed on the small curtain that separated economy from the premium cabins. Through the thin fabric, she could just make out Ms. Blake's silhouette, tall, proud, and painfully unaware of the storm gathering around her. The knowledge that an FAA emergency directive had already been sent hung heavy in the air, but the attendant in question seemed determined to maintain her facade of control. Minutes passed in a careful rhythm. The beverage cart rolled down the aisle, attendants offering water and soda, but Ms. Blake remained behind the curtain, as though anchored there by her own brittle confidence. Luis, the junior attendant, hovered in the aisle, offering curt nods to passengers, but avoiding any eye contact with Ms. Blake. His discomfort was palpable. He remembered how decisively Olivia had been ejected from 2A, and couldn't help but feel a shame that hung in the cabin like weighty dust. A couple in row 19 exchanged glances. The woman tapped her watch, then frowned and peered toward the cockpit door. Commander Monroe's earlier announcement had promised a quick return to the gate, yet here they were, still idling. No rumble of taxiing, no radio chatter rising above the engines. The ambient light from the overhead panels painted everyone in a dull glow, highlighting the subtle shifts of unease on each face. Meanwhile, Ms. Blake finally stepped out into the aisle, crisp heels clicking against the linoleum. She cleared her throat, voice pitched just high enough to draw attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, our catering service will be delayed while we finalize preparations. Please remain seated." She caught herself, swallowed, and forced a smile. Please remain seated until further notice. Thank you for your patience." The engineered calm in her tone rang hollow. A teenager in 17F peeked over the seatback and winked at his friend. A woman in 20C shook her head and murmured, "She's losing it." The small acts of rebellion delighted Olivia. Each whispered exchange, each sideways glance was a silent indictment of Ms. Blake's earlier arrogance. Olivia allowed her shoulders to relax fractionally, though her heart still thrummed with nervous excitement. She had initiated Directive 47B almost 10 minutes ago. Soon, the truth would surface. Yet even as she steeled herself for the aftermath, she remembered her mentor's advice at the United Nations. Power sometimes speaks in whispers, not shouts. Olivia tapped her fingers again and closed her eyes, feeling the gentle vibration of the plane's steady hum, a mental lifeline amid the churn of emotions. Behind her, the curtain twitched and Ms. Blake reappeared. Her uniform was impeccable, but her hair had loosened at the nape. A fine crease furrowed her brow as she straightened in the aisle, scanning the cabin. She caught Olivia's gaze for an unflattering instant, her expression flickering between defiance and alarm. Then she looked away, eyes darting to the overhead bin, as though expecting yet another challenge to her authority. Olivia felt that electric thrill, the quiet pleasure of watching someone who had abused power suddenly confronted by its consequences. Yet she refused to revel in gloating. Instead, she leaned forward and clasped her hands in her lap, reminding herself this was more than personal victory. It was about the principle that no one should be judged solely on appearance. In the galley, Miss Blake's normally swift, choreographed movements grew hesitant. She tapped a finger on the stainless steel countertop, then swiped at an invisible speck of lint on her sleeve. Luis watched from the corner of his eye, posture stiff. They both knew something unseen was closing in. A soft beep came from the flight deck, followed by a click that resonated through the intercom system. Every passenger stopped mid-bite, mid-sip, or mid-whisper. Silence drenched the cabin. Olivia felt her pulse spike and instinctively sat taller. Moments later, Captain Monroe's voice echoed with crisp clarity. "Attention all crew, we have an official FAA inquiry regarding a seating incident involving passenger Olivier Carter. Please prepare to assist federal officers when they board. Ms. Blake, report to the cockpit immediately for debriefing." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Ms. Blake, standing near row 10, froze like a statue. The spoon she held fell clattering to the tray she carried. Her lips parted in shock. She hadn't anticipated the FAA would involve herself so directly or call her up by name. Olivia sat back and exhaled, a slow, relieved breath, but she remained still, hands folded in her lap. She watched Ms. Blake's shoulders curl forward as she set down the tray and hurried away, swallowed by the curtain. For a fleeting moment, the cabin light seemed to hum brighter, as if the airplane itself was celebrating justice. Passengers murmured. A man in 16D rubbed his chin. "I guess she really messed up," he said to his neighbor. "Grounding the entire flight? That's not just a slap on the wrist." A woman in 21F pressed a finger to her lips and offered Olivia a small, apologetic smile. Olivia nodded graciously. As the cabin buzzed with quiet vindication, Olivia closed her eyes once more. She felt a gentle warmth spread through her chest, equal parts relief and resolve. This was the turning point, the moment when injustice met accountability. She thought of her father's pride, of the UN mentor's faith in her abilities, and of every statistic she had compiled to drive policy change. None of it felt irrelevant now. It all converged into this one clear victory. Behind the curtain, Ms. Blake's muffled footsteps echoed as she climbed into the cockpit. Olivia imagined the moment she crossed the threshold, the single knock, the curt nod, the sliding of the cockpit door closed. Inside, the captain and FAA officials would sift through her actions, ask the hard questions, and record everything. The murmur of conversation rose as passengers speculated about Ms. Blake's fate. Olivia listened, her expression calm, thoughtful. She reflected on how easily a single person's assumption can ruin someone else's dignity, and how the right action, no matter how quiet, can restore it. When the intercom buzzed again, this time signaling formal instructions for disembarkation, Olivia cracked her eyes open and looked forward. The overhead bins clicked shut, and the seatbelt sign illuminated once more. Everyone leaned forward, bracing for another announcement. To Olivia, though, it all felt like aftermath, the calm after the storm. She pressed her palms to her knees, closed her eyes, and let herself settle into that serene sense of purpose. The system she believed in had worked. Authority had been checked, and respect reinstated where it belonged. As the engines revved for taxiing back to the gate, Olivia whispered to herself, "Thank you, Directive 47B." And in that soft echo, she affirmed her faith. Sometimes true power is wielded not with force, but with the quiet knowledge that fairness deserves its moment in the light. A sudden silence fell over the cabin as the intercom crackled to life. Olivia felt it before she heard it, a low-frequency thrum like distant thunder. She glanced up from her seat in 18C to see Ms. Blake's silhouette materialize behind the curtain. Rarely had the lead attendant returned to the economy section. Olivia's heart ticked faster, but she remained still, arms folded, anticipation coiling like a spring. Overhead, just above Ms. Blake's head, the flight deck speaker emitted a sharp beep, an unfamiliar tone, urgent and insistent. Olivia watched Ms. Blake freeze in mid-stride, her perfectly coiffed hair swaying. The attendant's right hand jerked to her ear as though pulled by an invisible thread. The next moment she fumbled with the small handset clipped to her uniform, knocking a stack of white napkins to the floor. Metal trays clinked as they shifted. Passengers shifted in their seats, alarmed by the abrupt interruption in routine. A business traveler in 17A murmured to her neighbor, "That doesn't sound good," while a retiree in 18D gripped his armrest. The gentle hum of the engines felt distant now, replaced by a tension that rippled through every row. Ms. Blake pressed the handset to her ear. Her eyes, usually composed and confident, darted wildly. She inhaled sharply, shoulders trembling. Olivia watched as the attendant's face drained of color, lips parting to whisper something inaudible into the handset. Then, in a voice strained nearly to breaking, Ms. Blake spoke. "Directive 47B? Ground the plane? Now?" Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Olivia leaned forward, silent but keenly attentive. The curt whisper of Ms. Blake's panic was a far cry from the cold control she'd exerted just minutes ago. The attendant's hand shook so badly that she gripped the handset with both hands, as if bracing herself for what came next. Through the thin curtain, Olivia could just make out Ms. Blake's reflection in the glossy galley panel. The attendant's eyes widened, pupils dilating, and a tremor ran through her jaw. Her free hand flew to her scarf, as though seeking comfort or a shield. Passengers near the curtain craned their necks, catching sight of Ms. Blake's unraveling composure. In the cockpit, Captain Monroe's voice sliced through the cabin's tension. Olivia recognized his quiet authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have received an emergency FAA grounding order, Directive 47B. We are to remain at the gate until further notice. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The final words were punctuated by the sharp click of the intercom switch. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, relief mingling with satisfaction. She imagined the tactile reassurance of the seatbelt sign flickering on, the silent solemnity that followed such an announcement. But all eyes were on Ms. Blake. She had stifled a gasp into the handset and now stood motionless, her uniform suddenly stiff and foreign. She swallowed hard, throat bobbing. It was as if the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. A young flight attendant, Luis, stepped forward, concern etched on his face. He offered Ms. Blake a water bottle, but she shook her head, as though afraid even a single sip might betray her. Olivia recognized the look. Pure, unfiltered panic. The attendant who had wielded power so effortlessly now seemed at the mercy of an authority she neither created nor controlled. With one glance, Olivia felt a quiet triumph. No shouted protest could have delivered this moment more decisively. A soft murmur rose among the passengers. A woman in 19F whispered to her husband, "I've never seen anything like this." A man in 16C cleared his throat and muttered, "Grounded," over one girl's complaint. Olivia allowed herself a small, composed smile. She didn't need applause. The cabin's subdued recognition was enough. Mrs. Blake steadied herself against the curtain rail and took a measured breath. Her posture straightened, an effort to reclaim the poise she'd lost. She looked out over the cabin, eyes sweeping from row to row as though searching for blame. Then, with the grace of someone accustomed to masking fear, she tucked the handset back into its clip and gave one last, trembling nod toward the cockpit door. Every passenger held their breath as Miss Blake turned on her heel and strode toward the first-class galley. Her steps, once decisive, sounded tentative, punctuated by the soft click of her heels on the aisle carpet. Through the curtain, her silhouette disappeared, leaving behind a charged hush. Olivia sat back, pressing her palms flat against the armrests. She let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. A flight attendant who had tried to strip her of dignity had been rendered powerless by the very system she served. It was not retribution, it was accountability. And it had been delivered without a scene, without a shout, just a quiet command, and an unwavering belief in procedure. The galley curtain fluttered as Ms. Blake re-emerged, this time clutching her service notebook. She paused for a moment mid-aisle, as though lining up her next steps. Louise hovered at her side, offering a respectful distance. Passengers leaned forward, their eyes fixed. For the first time, the cabin felt unified, no longer divided by class, but bound by a shared understanding that justice had its seat in every row. Captain Monroe's voice came again, calm and final. "Thank you for your patience. We will keep you updated as we coordinate with FAA operations. For now, please remain seated." With that, the intercom fell silent. The engines resumed a steady purr as the cockpit door clicked shut. Olivia closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. In that moment of quiet, she felt her heart slow to a steady rhythm. Pride, relief, and resolve blending into a single, clear purpose. She would return to her seat in first class soon enough, but more importantly, she had reaffirmed something fundamental: that respect isn't reserved, it's earned. And that even the quietest voice, at the right moment, can shift the power of an entire system. A tense hush settled over the cabin as Ms. Blake emerged from behind the curtain, her face paling under the soft overhead lights. She clutched her service notebook to her chest as though it were a lifeline. Captain Monroe's firm voice crackled through the intercom, drawing the cabin's collective attention. "Ms. Blake, please report to the cockpit immediately for debriefing." The words landed like a verdict. Mrs. Blake paused mid-stride, her polished heels clicking hollowly on the aisle carpet. She glanced toward the cockpit door at the front of the plane, a sleek panel of steel and glass that now seemed more like a judge's bench than a place of refuge. Passengers shifted in their seats, instinctively leaning forward. A ripple of curious murmurs passed through the rows. The mother 2 seats ahead whispered to her daughter, "I've never seen a crew member called up like that." A businessman tapped his watch and muttered, "This must be serious." Even in economy, the air felt electric. Ms. Blake inhaled, squared her shoulders, and forced herself to walk on. She moved with measured steps, each one echoing the crack in her composure. As she passed seat 2A, Olivia's former throne, Olivia caught her eye and offered a calm, even nod. No gloating, just a poised acknowledgement. "It's your turn now." Ms. Blake looked away quickly, cheeks flushing. The passengers in first and business class peered down at her as though she were a performer on a stage. In that moment, Ms. Blake was both accused and audience, forced to face them all. The cabin lights dimmed briefly as the flight attendants prepared to close the galley door. Through the narrow glass window embedded in the cockpit door, Ms. Blake's reflection appeared. Her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes wide with apprehension. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths. Captain Monroe stood at his station, headset in hand, watching her approach. Beside him, the co-pilot's shoulders were squared, expression unreadable. 2 FAA operations managers crowded the cockpit, one with a tablet in hand, the other scanning a printed manifest. Their presence turned the cockpit into an impromptu tribunal. Passengers craned their necks to watch. A soft clicking of cameras went up and down the cabin as a few discreet phones lit up. Ms. Blake took a final breath and tapped on the cockpit door. A quick "come in" sounded, and the door slid open with a muted hiss. Inside, Olivia imagined the sterile brightness of the cockpit, the cool blue glow of the instrument panel, the quiet hum of avionics. Ms. Blake stepped onto the small landing, notebook clutched, and closed the door behind her. The silence in the cabin that followed was heavy. Passengers exchanged glances, some sympathetic, some curious, many quietly satisfied. The flight attendant Luis approached Olivia and offered a small, respectful nod. Olivia nodded back, heart fluttering with a mix of relief and empathy. This was not just about vindication, it was about witnessing the moment when authority had to answer for its misuse. For several minutes the cabin remained still. Drinks went unpoured, magazine pages stayed unturned. Everyone sensed the gravity of the debriefing. In the dimmed lighting, the rows of seats looked like courtroom benches, and Olivia felt the weight of every silent gaze. Back in the cockpit, Captain Monroe cleared his throat and set aside his coffee mug. He regarded Ms. Blake with professional detachment. "We've received the FAA's directive, Ms. Blake," he began, voice calm but firm. "I need you to explain, in your own words, the sequence of events that led you to question Ms. Carter's seat assignment." Ms. Blake swallowed hard. Her gaze flickered to the tablet in the FAA manager's hand, then back to the captain. I followed procedure, Captain," she said, voice trembling. "When I saw a passenger I didn't recognize in business class, I assumed a ticketing error. I asked for her boarding pass, and when I saw the name and status, Her voice cracked, and she stopped, as though the truth were lodged in her throat. The FAA manager cleared his throat. "Ms. Blake, the passenger's ticket was scanned and verified by ground staff. You did not request that verification, nor did you consult the manifest. Instead, you made a judgment based on appearance. Is that correct?" Ms. Blake's shoulders sagged. She closed her eyes for a split second, then opened them, blinking back tears. "Yes," she whispered. "It was my assumption." Olivia felt a quiet ripple of astonishment ripple through the cabin. On her phone, she saw a fellow passenger send a silent emoji of surprise to a friend. An involuntary collective gasp. This wasn't shouted. It was conceded. In the cockpit, the captain exchanged a brief look with the co-pilot. Then he turned back to Ms. Blake. "Thank you for your honesty. We'll need a full written statement upon landing. For now, please return to your position and continue service under supervision." Ms. Blake nodded, face pale. She stepped back to the threshold of the cockpit door and hesitated. Behind her, the FAA managers scribbled notes. Her eyes flicked over the rows of curious faces visible through the window. Then, with a final breath, she stepped through and closed the door. The intercom crackled on. Captain Monroe's voice once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're cleared to prepare for departure, pending FAA clearance upon landing. We apologize for the delay." The cabin exhaled as one. Passengers sank back, the tension loosening at last. Olivia leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands, and allowed herself a small, private smile. This was the moment when the system she believed in had taken its course, when procedure checked prejudice and quiet accountability carried the day. She caught Luis's eye as he passed with a service tray. He offered her a glass of water, perhaps an unspoken apology for the ordeal. Olivia accepted it with a nod of thanks. The gentle clink of ice in the glass sounded to her like a soft applause, an affirmation of dignity restored. And as the cabin lights brightened and the engines hummed back to life, Olivia settled back into her seat, confident that the truth, once unleashed, would never again be overshadowed by assumption. A low murmur rippled through the cabin as Ms. Blake stepped away from the cockpit door. The hush wasn't polite. It carried the weight of collective awareness. a gentle indictment of anyone who had looked the other way. Olivia Carter sat in 18C, her back straight, eyes forward, but she felt every gaze settle on her like a soft spotlight. None of them met her head-on. Instead, they whispered in pairs, edged in remorse. A woman in 17D leaned toward her husband, voice barely more than a breath. "Can you believe she did that? Grounding the whole flight?" The man shook his head, frowning. A few rows ahead, a businessman in a navy blazer tapped out a quick text. Unbelievable what she did. One girl, one call. Olivia's heart fluttered, not from nerves, but from a quiet glow of vindication. She let her fingers rest on the edge of the armrest and exhaled softly. Captain Monroe's voice came over the intercom, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received clearance to taxi. We apologize again for the inconvenience and appreciate your patience. Miss Carter, please join us in business class." The announcement was firm but respectful, a far cry from Miss Blake's earlier dismissal. Olivia felt a gentle lift in her chest. She unbuckled her seatbelt, collected her portfolio, and smoothed the crease in her blouse. Around her, passengers straightened, some shifting to make way, others offering small, encouraging smiles. As she rose, Olivia caught Luis's eye. He stood to the side, holding a tray of water bottles, uncertainty in his posture. When their eyes met, Luis tipped his head in a subtle bow, a quiet apology, a gesture of solidarity. Olivia nodded, feeling the corners of her lips tug upward. She made her way down the aisle. Each step echoed the journey she'd taken, from the humiliation of the lounge, through the indignity of economy class, to this moment of calm restoration. Passengers parted like the Red Sea, clearing a path back toward the curtain. A grandmother in row 15 offered her a reassuring smile. A young mother mouthed, "I'm sorry," as she passed. Olivia's pulse hummed with gratitude but remained steady. At the curtain, Olivia paused. She pressed her fingertips against the cool metal frame for a moment, gathering herself. On the other side, business class passengers sat upright, some craning their necks to witness her return. The seat that had been hers, 2A, awaited, empty but for the faint indentation she'd left. The leather looked immaculate again, no sign of spilled champagne or confrontation. It was as if the world had reset itself to right a previous wrong. Mrs. Blake stood near the galley, arms folded, eyes downcast. For a heartbeat, Olivia considered skipping the formalities, simply sliding back into her seat. But this wasn't about vengeance. It was about dignity. She lifted her chin, drew in a steady breath, and stepped forward. "Miss Carter?" Ms. Blake's voice cracked slightly, betraying her tension. She extended a hand toward 2A. "Your seat, miss." She hesitated, swallowing. "I apologize for the confusion earlier. Please, have a seat." Olivia offered her a polite nod. "Thank you." She accepted the gesture without fanfare, sliding into 2A with measured grace. The fold-out tray clicked softly as she tucked her portfolio onto the side table. The plush cushion seemed to welcome her back, and Olivia let herself settle into its embrace. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm glow as flight attendants moved through the rows, preparing to finalize service. Ms. Blake hovered nearby, as if expecting another protest, yet none came. Instead, the cabin exhaled, a collective shift from awkward tension to a tentative peace. Olivia unclasped her portfolio, flipping to a blank cover page. She leaned back and closed her eyes for a split second, letting the relief wash over her. She had earned this seat, no longer by birthright or a father's name, but by the quiet force of truth. Her dignity felt restored, undiminished by earlier prejudice. A soft chime indicated that the flight attendants were ready to resume beverage service. A cart rolled by, and this time a glass of sparkling water was offered to Olivia first. An unspoken apology extended. She took it with a small smile and raised her glass in a subtle toast to the cabin. A man in 2C caught her eye and raised his own in return. She returned the gesture with a nod of thanks. Passengers in other rows whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with admiration rather than judgment. A mother tapped her child on the shoulder. "See, sweetie, right is right." An elderly gentleman in row 4 pressed his lips together and gave a small approving nod to the flight attendant. The shift was palpable. Respect had flowed back into the cabin. Olivia gazed out the window at the runway lights stretching ahead, the wingtip dancing in the glow. She felt a calm certainty settle in her mind, that justice, once set in motion, travels swiftly and quietly. No raised voices, no spectacle. Just a single call, a steadfast conviction, and an unwavering belief in procedure. Behind her, Ms. Blake retreated to her station, shoulders slumped yet relieved. The attendant's crisp posture was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. Olivia recognized the weight of that transformation. A fellow human confronting her mistake in the same confined space where she'd once wielded authority without question. The seatbelt sign clicked off as the engines began to taxi toward the runway. Olivia sipped her water and opened her portfolio, scanning over the policy summaries that had brought her this far. The graphs and bullet points were familiar companions. Now they felt fused with the lived reality of her own experience in this cabin. A gentle smile curved her lips. She closed the portfolio and pressed her fingertips together in front of her. A small gesture of peaceful resolve. Around her, the hum of conversation picked up, not with tension, but with a renewed sense of camaraderie. People leaned forward in their seats, scratching notes on their programs, or simply chatting quietly as if the cabin had regained its natural rhythm. For Olivia, this moment marked more than a return to her seat. It was a testament to the power of calm conviction, of rules designed to protect everyone equally, and of a quiet resilience that no amount of prejudice could shatter. She sat back, hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze drifting across the cabin with measured awareness. And as Flight 72 gathered speed on the taxiway, preparing for takeoff at last, Olivia allowed herself one more glance toward Ms. Blake. The attendant offered a brief, sincere nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that respect, once lost, can be reclaimed. In the gentle glow of the cabin lights, Olivia Carter closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, savoring the moment. She had been dislodged from her rightful place and carried herself through the ordeal with dignity. Now, she was home, not just in seat 2A, but in the quiet confidence that she belonged there, and that justice, when delivered calmly, resonates far louder than any shout. Olivia settled back into the plush leather of seat 2A with a quiet sigh, feeling the familiar contours support her shoulders. The cabin lights were soft, casting a warm glow over the rows of passengers, many of whom now regarded her with respectful nods rather than curious stares. In that moment, the tension that had gripped the flight earlier felt like a distant memory. Ms. Blake stood just beyond the divider, her posture uncharacteristically humble. She cleared her throat, drawing the cabin's attention once more. Olivia allowed herself a small, encouraging smile before meeting the attendant's gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ms. Blake began, voice steady but sincere, "I want to apologize for my earlier actions. I misjudged Ms. Carter based on appearance alone. That was wrong, and I am truly sorry." Her words hung in the air, and a hush fell over the cabin. Olivia nodded once, acknowledgement, not triumph. The consummate professional, she believed even apologies should be delivered with grace. Around her, passengers offered soft applause, a gentle rhythm that rippled through both cabins. A gentleman in the front row raised his glass of water in a muted toast. A woman in business class dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The toddler 2 rows back clapped once, delighted by the sound. Olivia felt a rush of warmth. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about restoring dignity quietly, sincerely. Ms. Blake's eyes flickered with emotion. She placed a hand over her heart. "I let my assumptions get in the way of my duties," she continued. "I promise to do better, to treat every passenger with the respect they deserve." Behind Ms. Blake, the junior attendant, Louise, offered Olivier a small nod and a respectful bow. Olivier returned it, maintaining eye contact long enough to convey both forgiveness and solidarity. It was a moment of shared humanity, one that needed no further words. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, smiles replacing the curiosity that once colored their expressions. A woman in 2C whispered to her companion, "That took real courage." The companion merely nodded, eyes fixed on Olivia, as if she were a beacon of resilience. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, savoring the affirmation of justice restored. She reached into her seat back pocket and pulled out her notebook, flipping to a blank page. With a careful pen stroke, she jotted 2 words at the top: "Dignity restored." As the engines roared to life and the captain's voice announced impending takeoff, Olivia tucked the notebook away. She fastened her seatbelt, her thoughts drifting to the policy proposals she'd been developing for renewable energy, work she intended to return to once the plane touched down. The contrast struck her. Global issues worthy of debate, yet human decency was often the simplest form of progress. Before the seatbelt sign turned off, Ms. Blake approached Olivia's row. She placed a small envelope on the side table, an official FAA commendation for Olivia's composure under pressure. In a low voice meant only for Olivia, she said, "You reminded all of us why respect matters." Olivia accepted the envelope with gratitude. "Thank you," she replied softly. Ms. Blake offered her a genuine smile, one free of the earlier arrogance. "Welcome back to 2A," she said. Olivia leaned back, pressed her palms to her lap, and exhaled a long, contented breath. In that moment, business class felt not just like a travel upgrade, but a sanctuary of restored respect and shared humanity. And as Flight 742 soared into the night sky, Olivia knew this chapter of her journey would echo far beyond any policy paper, because sometimes the simplest act of an apology can change everything. Olivia settled into her seat and looked directly into the aisle camera, her gaze calm, inviting. The cabin's soft murmur served as the backdrop as she spoke in a measured, warm tone. "Hey everyone," she began, voice steady. "I'm Olivia Carter. You just saw what happened when I stood up for my rights. Without yelling, without drama. I want to know, have you ever been told you didn't belong somewhere you'd earned a place?" A brief pause let her question hang in the air. She let the camera capture the attentive faces around her, passengers leaning forward, eyes bright with curiosity. "Drop a comment below and tell me your story," Olivia continued. "Maybe you've faced something similar, at work, at school, or even in a public place. How did you handle it? Or if you haven't yet, what would you do in my seat? I read every comment and love hearing from you." She leaned back and offered a genuine smile. "If this kind of story resonates with you, when quiet strength beats prejudice, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, tap subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss our next video. We've got more powerful, true stories coming your way." Olivia folded her hands in her lap and nodded toward the cabin. "Thanks for being part of this journey with me. I'll see you in the comments." As her friendly invitation faded to a final shot of the cabin, passengers exchanging nods and whispers, the screen transitioned to a gentle end card, encouraging viewers to share and subscribe. The cabin settled into an unusual quiet as Flight 742 touched down at JFK, the city's skyline flickering through the oval windows. Entertainment screens dimmed, and even the flight attendants moved with a subdued purpose. Olivia Carter remained in seat 2A, hands folded on her lap, watching as the cabin crew prepared for disembarkation. She felt a gentle flutter of anticipation, but this time, it wasn't nerves. It was the promise of real lasting change. Moments later, Captain Monroe's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will begin disembarkation row by row. Please remain seated until your row is called." Olivia stood, shouldering her satchel, and watched the first-class divider curtain part. Ms. Blake emerged from the galley, her uniform crisp, but her expression solemn. She met Olivia's gaze for a fleeting second. No pride, no defiance, just a shared acknowledgement that this moment marked the end of one story and the beginning of another. As passengers filed past, some offered Olivia tentative smiles, others murmured quiet words of thanks. A business traveler in 1C held out a small card. "You reminded me what dignity looks like," he whispered. Olivia accepted it with a nod, warmth pooling in her chest. Once the aisles cleared, Olivia and Ms. Blake found themselves side by side near the cabin door. A ground agent from the FAA waited there, a badge glinting on his lapel. Behind him, a line of airline executives, operations managers, human resources directors, and Martin Raines, the airline CEO, stood in tailored suits. Ms. Blake's shoulders squared as she stepped forward, escorted by a uniformed officer. The FAA agent spoke quietly into a recorder. "Flight attendant Ms. Blake, you are temporarily suspended pending formal investigation into discrimination and breach of protocol." Ms. Blake nodded, eyes fixed on the agent's badge, then allowed herself to exhale. For 10 years, her uniform had symbolized authority. Now it represented accountability. Next, Olivia approached the CEO. Martin Raines extended his hand, his grip firm but respectful. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice measured, "on behalf of our airline, I want to personally apologize for how you were treated. Effective immediately, we're implementing a new 2-step seat verification protocol and mandatory bias training for all crew members. We're also creating a direct line to the FAA for any passenger concerns regarding discrimination." Olivia smiled gently. "Thank you, Mr. Raines. I appreciate that you're taking responsibility." He nodded, eyes earnest. "Your courage reminded us that respect isn't optional. It's essential. And we'll be sharing the details of these changes publicly." Olivia turned away, stepping onto the jet bridge, the hustle of ground crews and tug vehicles welcoming her return to the world beyond the cabin. She paused, looking back one last time through the open door. The plane's interior, once a site of conflict, now felt like a classroom where lessons in empathy and fairness had been taught. A few days later, the airline released an official statement. "In light of recent events on Flight 742, we are instituting the following measures effective immediately. 2-step seat verification. All passengers in premium cabins will have their boarding passes scanned at check-in and again upon boarding. Mandatory bias and empathy training. Quarterly, interactive sessions for all flight crew, emphasizing passenger dignity and elimination of unconscious bias. FAA Liaison Protocol. A direct, real-time reporting channel between crew and the FAA for any claims of discrimination, with an independent investigator assigned within 24 hours. We apologize unreservedly to Ms. Olivia Carter and all passengers affected. Our commitment to passenger rights is unwavering." Within hours, industry publications hailed the airline's swift policy overhaul as groundbreaking and long overdue. Discussions spread across social media, with hashtags like "Seat with Respect" and "Directive 47B" trending among travelers and advocacy groups alike. That evening, Olivia sat at her laptop in her Lincoln Square apartment, reflecting on the whirlwind of events. She opened her email to find dozens of messages, schoolmates sharing similar stories of prejudice, civil rights organizations inviting her to speak at panels, and even a couple of airlines asking for insights into implementing their own bias training. She replied to a handful, keeping her responses simple. "Thank you for reaching out. Keep pushing for fairness." Her father's final message waited in her inbox. "You did exactly what you needed to do. Proud of you, Liv." She smiled at the screen and closed the email. In the quiet of her apartment, Olivia realized this was her new calling. Not as a diplomat or a pilot, but as an everyday advocate for justice. The policies she had influenced on a single flight were already shaping industry-wide change. A week later, the FAA hosted a virtual summit on passenger rights. Directors of aviation safety, airline executives, and senior FAA officials logged in from around the globe. On the agenda, case study Flight 74202, a detailed walkthrough of how a coded emergency directive grounded bias and grounded an entire airline's complacency. Olivia joined the summit as a guest speaker. When her turn came, she leaned into the webcam, gaze steady, voice calm. "Thank you all for being here. We talk a lot about safety in aviation, engines, weather, mechanical issues, but the most dangerous turbulence isn't in the sky. It's in our judgment. When we assume someone doesn't belong, we risk injuring their dignity. Today's policies aren't just procedural fixes. They're commitments to treat everyone with respect, no matter their background. That's how we keep our skies and our society truly safe." The virtual room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause emojis and supportive comments. In that global audience, Olivia saw not just faces, but a shared responsibility to uphold human dignity. Back on her favorite subway train the next day, Olivia looked up from her phone to the passing city lights. She remembered the cabin of Flight 742, the hushed rows, the intercom's calm authority, the ripple of respect that followed. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. The flight may have never taken off as scheduled, but the truth it carried had already soared. And as she stepped off at her stop, blending into the bustling crowd, Olivia knew the real journey had only just begun.